Announcements by Your Honor, the Acting President.
I've received correspondence, communication from, first of all, the President, who is not going to be with us today. We also received communication from Senator Drakes that she, too, will not be with us today. Also, Senator Maynard is not going to be in the Senate today, neither is Senator Tate. Correspondence from Senator Moore, Tony Moore, to the effect that she will be running late. She could be late for this session. So those are the announcements and the communication that we will have had today. Senator Moore is running late or not here?
Late.
Senator Moore is also running a bit late today.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following documents. The audited financial statements of the Board of Management of the Alexandra School for the financial years ended March 31st, 2009 to March the 31st, 2012. Audited financial statements of the Board of Management at the St. Michael's School for the financial years ended March the 31st, 2008 to March the 31st, 2012. Audited financial statements and annual reports on the activities of the Board of Management of the Lodge School for the financial years ended March the 31st, 2014 to March the 31st, 2015. And the loan agreement between the Government of Barbados and CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, Water Infrastructure Rehabilitation Project.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate. Moved by minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. That standing order has been suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Appropriation Bill 2020 be read a first time.
The question is that the Appropriation Bill 2020 be read a first time. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Public business. Order number 3. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Appropriation Bill 2020.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I rise to speak in this appropriation bill and to move the second reading of it, I do so, Mr. President, with a strange feeling. I'm a feeling of concern, a feeling of worry, and indeed a feeling of hope. Because as I rise to speak on this bill, we are confronted, like the rest of the globe, by the pandemic of the coronavirus. I am concerned in terms of my country, in terms of what lies ahead of us. I'm concerned as I watch the panic in my country, in some parts of this country, in terms of persons' preparation. I'm concerned, as I note, that we are trying to make ourselves ready and prepared to face the consequences of this pandemic. It can have not only in terms of health, but in terms of the socioeconomic consequences could have a deleterious effect on the development of our country. I am indeed worried still in terms of what is happening globally when I see the trends in terms of the mortality in various countries, and we are never certain what will happen in terms of individual countries. And of course, it is not an exact sense in terms of the management and the control of a pandemic, but they are not new. The Spanish flu, the famous pandemic in 1980 to 1920, is estimated to result in the death of 40 to 50 million persons. And indeed, some of us will recall the Hong Kong flu of the 1968-1969 period, which I believe is estimated to cost between 1 to 2 million deaths globally. If there's a good thing in terms of pandemics, it's certainly that, as the trend goes, the world has come a long way since then in terms of the research, in terms of modalities of prevention, and in terms of the chemicals reaction that have been done in terms of the control and indeed the treatment of these pandemics. And so, sir, I am presenting also with a sense of hope that the globe will get over this in the not too distant future. But certainly, being a Barbadian, I'm hopeful that we will be able to manage and control this dreadful pandemic, which is already in our shores, and that by and large, the vast majority of our cases will be mild to moderate. And we wouldn't see the frightening scenes that we have seen in terms of Italy, in terms of Spain, in terms of Iran, and now certainly from a different aspect in terms of what we see in our neighbor to the north. And so, Mr. President, it sets a different setting to the presentation of the appropriation bill. I think you're well aware that this is normally the time for those of the government side to speak about the achievements and how well they've been doing, and in terms of the programs in the various ministries, and indeed for the opposition to oppose if it is their wish for the sake of opposing in some cases. And of course for the independents to hopefully give a balanced and neutral view of the economic scene. Clearly, this situation is different, completely different. These estimates would have been prepared months ago, and certainly up to February when we were having discussions. The whole issue, coronavirus is not yet a pandemic, and certain conclusions would have been made in terms of the estimates of revenue and expenditure. And obviously, sir, these would have to be relooked, and I will come to this later on in my presentation. Obviously, this, as I said before in the Honourable Chamber, this is probably the most important bill that is debated annually. It is listed as a constitutional requirement under Section 109 of our Constitution, and indeed, its importance is also listed in the standing orders of the Honourable House. And it usually tells you that it is an estimate and sets out the details of the operating and capital spending requirement of ministries for the fiscal year, which in this case will be commencing the 1st of April 2020. Having said that, and I've said this before, that these estimates are never cast in stone. And I believe in this current situation, this indicates that they're never cast in stone, and one is never certain. I believe my honorable colleague on the other side, Senator Rogers, would say that nothing is certain but the Lord. And clearly, in this situation, we can sit down for hours, we can do calculations for days, we can work out all sorts of algorithms and graphs and projections, and we can come together, and then we can have one simple coronavirus spreading rapidly across the globe, and that turns everything upside down as it relates to our plans. Having said that, though, sir, it would be remiss of me not to speak about how the government was doing until February this year. Clearly, we had our challenges, But the government, I believe, on both sides, this entire chamber would agree that the government was doing quite well so far. Taking note of where we were in 2018, in May 2018, and where we are indeed in March 2020. And I know my honorable colleague on the other side, Senator Frank, he's there nodding in agreement in terms of how well the present government has indeed been doing. There's no denying it. In terms of the BERT program, there was some criticism of it. They said that it was an IMF plan. We debunked that theory. It said that a lot of the targets were not achievable. We've achieved them in terms of the IMF and in terms of those targets that had been set. There we have stabilized the economy. We had debt in terms of the public debt, be it international or local debt. And we are now ready for growth and transformation. And now this has become upon us. Indeed, Mr. President, from foreign reserves at $400 million in June 2018, I'm told that on Friday last week it was at $1.56 billion. Covering over a time in June 2018 where we barely could cover 5 weeks imports. We are now we have coverage of about 25 weeks of imports. From a high GDP to debt to GDP ratio of 176%, being the third indebted in the world at that time, we are now 118.8% at the end of January this year, and especially partly due to the public debt restructuring and putting our fiscal finances in order. Mr. President, government ran a fiscal primary surplus of 3.5% of GDP, or $366 million in financial year 2018-2019. And that was the first surplus in 10 years. And I know that my honorable Senator Nurse, he's looking at me quizzically, but I think he understands exactly what I'm speaking about when I speak about primary surplus. I'm speaking about government's revenue minus its expenditure once we remove interest and amortization and those matters. And it was 3.6%, as I said, 3.5%. And at the end of February this year, we had recorded a primary surplus of 5.7% of GDP, or $597 million, well on the path to the 6% at the end of this month, which we had set ourselves, and which some members in here of this honorable chamber were a bit critical of. I'm saying now that having set this target for ourselves, and where some members were saying that we should have aimed for 3 or 4 rather than trying to aim for 6. Fortuitously, this 6% that we aim for is able now to give us some balance, some cushion, as we try to deal with the issues related to COVID-19. I need not speak about the credit rating improvement. After 22, 23 downgrades in 10 years, we've been upgraded twice since then, and we're almost back to investment grade. And so we have done this is in terms of the macroeconomic structure of the country, but we have also helped Barbadians, especially average Barbadians, and indeed middle-class Barbadians. There was a 5% wage increase to civil servants. Persons wondered how we could do it. There was a removal of the NSRL. There was a reintroduction of payment of tuition fees for university students. We increased the minimum non-contributory and minimum contributory pensions from $155 to $225. We introduced the concept of the trust loans, which has allowed a number of Barbadian entrepreneurs to benefit. And we've injected, I believe it is $20 million in this project. My colleague, Senator Lynette Holder, was very much involved in this process, and I'm sure she'll be in a position to speak to it at length, and in terms of the benefits it has brought to this society. Indeed, we also, in terms of taxation, we look at the reverse tax credit level. and remove the cutoff from $18,000 a year to $25,000. And those persons would get $2,083 per month, and this included 7,200 persons. We reduced the income tax bands. Indeed, those earning between $25,000 to $35,000, they would not be paying any. They would submit the forms, but they would get a compensatory income credit. The tax bands, on which a rate of 16%, 33.5%, and 40% were previously applied, were abolished. And the first tax band, $50,000, on which a rate of 12.5% was then introduced. The second tax band on taxable income over $50,000, which had a tax rate of 33.5%, and tax was reduced in January this year to 28.5%. And so we resumed paying tax refunds and paid out over $1.1 billion in terms of NIS, income tax, and corporate tax refunds. So we went further. We started the 24-hour operation of a polyclinic at Sir Winston Scott, and we provided $11 million to train young persons in various social programs, be it Youth Advance, etc., within the Ministry of Youth. So, Mr. President, we were doing well, and indeed, the government has a record of which it should be duly proud. However, as I said, this issue has come upon us. And what are we doing? We've recognized that globally there will be tremendous fall off in terms of tourism. We can see the airlines, I believe Virgin Airlines is having its last flight to Barbados today, indeed to and from Barbados today. American Airlines has indicated that their last flights will be this weekend. JetBlue is scheduled to stop flying here shortly. British Airways, I believe, is scheduled to continue until the end of the month. And other airlines into Barbados clearly have reduced their flights into Barbados. Countries have begun to close their borders across the globe. I believe that I saw some schedules for some flights over the weekend and saw an American airline flight scheduled to come to Barbados with 22 passengers. And so this is going to have, and is already having, serious consequences to our tourism sector, which is indeed our main money earner. Several hotels have already closed, and some of them have sent home their staff already. This also applies to restaurants. And I think we all appreciate in terms of tourism how the importance of the hotel sector in terms of various aspects of our economy, in terms of goods and services, in terms of staff, in terms of utilities, in terms of the taxes. Obviously, all of these things will be affected once hotels start to close their doors. Restaurants, as I said, are being affected, and it would indeed have a spin-off effect. The cruise line, fortunately, it was not in the height of the season. It should be November, December, January, but certainly now cruises have come to an end, and we are faced with the challenge indeed of trying to get persons back home, recognizing that Barbados is a home port for several of these cruise liners, and so that is a difficulty that we are faced with. The government is mindful of this, and I believe honorable members would have heard the Honorable Prime Minister in the other place speaking in terms of the measures being put in place to mitigate the potential effects of these closures, and then we got the mitigation, the deleterious socioeconomic effects of COVID-19. Probably best put frame in that manner. And she's spoken to the issues in terms of providing for the most vulnerable families, where we had a project before which was focusing on the 650 most vulnerable families in Barbados. The expansion of it now to include 1,500 families. Increasing the welfare grants by 40% to individuals, and the $10 million has been allocated at this time in these circumstances for that. In addition, $10 million has also been allocated in terms of dealing with the Vulnerable Families Project. and a good venture recognizing Barbadians, and indeed it is a time that all Barbadians should come together. This is not a political matter in terms of the business sector, labor, and government, and indeed the church in playing their role in supporting those persons who were suffering or less well off. And so we've launched the Adopt a Family program within the ministry, where business entities and individuals, I dare say, can make contributions or indeed agree to provide funds on a monthly basis to help a particular family. And I must commend those business entities which have already come forward and have indicated support and sizable support for this venture. She's also recognized, the Prime Minister, that is the Honorable Prime Minister, that we need to have people train and retrain in these times. Persons will be home, and she has made sure that in terms of the plans for training, that these are increased. Discussions with the banking sector have been quite successful in terms of the provision of moratoriums on loans and mortgages to assist Barbadians through this period of time. And indeed, a good thing would be that for some of these restaurants and hotels to be encouraged to do some of the repairs and refurbishments which are necessary. And in this regard, I believe it is $10 million was added to the Small Hotels Fund for loans on favorable interest rates to assist some of these hotels, small hotels, in being able to modernize and do some vital refurbishments that were necessary to their various plans. So we are looking at it in a holistic fashion, recognizing, of course, the importance of looking after the most vulnerable in the society. Those are the ones who are likely to be most affected in this situation. Of course, it will mean numerous changes within the society. I believe it's stated that we are at stage 2. And the next stage is stage 3, where we move to shut down the entire country in terms of businesses, in terms of persons spending most of their time at home, and provision will have to be made for persons to operate from home, to continue working from home where it is possible, because we would want to reduce as far as possible the spread and to contain the coronavirus in specific areas, if it is in fact in specific areas in Barbados, recognizing all the time that our problem is that Barbados is quite densely populated, and there's always the potential for the disease to spread rapidly in Barbados. I know we have tried in this situation to introduce the social distancing. We've been trying it in this honorable chamber this morning, Mr. President. But I think it is something culturally for Barbadians that will be quite difficult. I think Barbadians like to lime, they like to hang out, they like to socialize. And I believe the whole culture now in terms of telling them, for instance, that rum shops might have to be closed early, as it's happening with the pubs in the United Kingdom. I think these are things that we will have to gradually get, and I believe the sensitization and the education is absolutely necessary as we try to introduce these cultural behavior changes to Barbadians, but which are absolutely necessary. There have been persons who have been speaking in terms of, and it is normal, that somehow felt that Barbados, there would be a global pandemic, and that somehow Barbados exists in some impervious bubble and would never be exposed to it. And of course, that is fallacious thinking. Indeed, there are those now who are saying that we should have closed our borders as other countries have done long ago. The interesting thing, however, is that I believe probably over 70% of our cases are in fact Barbadians who left here, went to visit relatives, and have returned and tested positive. So the argument is out. Do you close your borders to all your citizens, even those who've gone away for a week or two? How would you do it? My other question, and it hasn't been addressed yet, is when you close your borders completely and you seal your country from COVID at this point in time, when do you reopen? I think we all know and would appreciate, and for those of you who don't know, pandemics occur in phases. Phase 1, phase 2, and sometimes the second phase is even more deleterious. Usually in the first phase, you develop what is called herd immunity. People get it, some people get it, they don't get it ever again. Some who are protected, or who were never exposed to it, and the slightest exposure, 1 person, 2 person, can spark off again an epidemic of the disease. So indeed, you can have a phase 1, you get through it, and then there's a phase 2. And depending how you have managed your borders and how well developed your herd immunity is, then it allows you to determine how you will survive. The government has obviously had to look at expenditure, urgent expenditure, in areas where it had not necessarily proposed or there was no expectation to have to do so. Fortunately, in terms of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, our main tertiary healthcare institution, the government had agreed, I believe it was in January, February, to commence a serious recapitalization project of that institution and had made available $30 million for the purpose of recapitalization in terms of acquiring equipment that was needed for several years, and to allow the QEH to function in a much more efficient manner. And this equipment, I think we've heard over the years of the issues with autoclave machines. It was supposed this equipment was to make provision for purchase of new autoclave machines, for ventilators, ironically, to purchase ventilators, to purchase various monitors, to purchase ICU beds, other vital pieces of equipment that the hospital needed: X-ray equipment, portable X-ray equipment, ultrasound, a new CAT scan. All of these were sort of the things that were on that list for purchase and have been ordered. The purchase orders have been sent out. And fortuitously, obviously, a lot of these things, like the ventilators that we hear talking about, would be useful in terms of if we came to that severity of a outbreak of coronavirus in Barbados. So that's $30 million in terms of equipment for the QEH. But we've said this is our main tertiary care institution. And if there's one thing the government wants to guarantee, again, I said there's no certainty in anything, that the coronavirus infection is kept out of that institution for obvious reasons. We are fortunate in that government constructed the government of the day, and I believe the son of the minister at the time is an honorable member of the Senate, an honorable independent. I know he has no political affiliations whatsoever. But the minister at that time, with his advisors, took the good advice of those around him and converted one of the buildings at Enmore into an Ebola center. It is a 6-bedded unit, and it is an isolation facility, and ideally suited, but only 6 beds. We felt in a pandemic of this magnitude, because in terms of Ebola, it was localized to certain countries in Africa, and never really, I think 1 or 2 people died in the States, but nothing that really, you were just being prepared. This one we see sweeping across the globe. And we felt at that time, obviously, that 6 beds in an isolation unit was not going to be enough. We looked around Barbados, and it came upon the Harrison's Point in St. Lucie. And it was toured, and we felt that this could be an ideal location. It has buildings erected, although they've been stripped of their windows, their doors, their wiring, their plumbing over the years, but the physical structure of these buildings is still intact. And it was felt that these buildings could be converted rather quickly. I believe it is a process that started 2 weeks ago, and I believe it is expected to be completed in 2 to 3 weeks, to convert one of these buildings into an isolation center, full ICU type isolation center, which would accommodate ICU beds and would have the capacity to do ventilation, and also an area, not as intense, but still in terms of isolation, of about 40 beds in what we call like a secondary facility. And indeed, there are other buildings which we estimate is one building to use in terms of a quarantine center, which can house probably probably about 140, 150 persons. We also looked at Paragon. Sorry, Mr. President. Paragon, and utilizing there as a quarantine station for about, they can accommodate about 240, 250 persons in quarantine. And there are a number of other buildings there, and we're also using one of them in terms of isolation. So we're building the capacity. We've been utilizing Paragon for some time. The process was that when persons started coming in from countries, and we were faced initially with persons leaving China, when the embargo was in China, persons leaving China, skillfully getting through Europe to Germany and taking flights to Barbados, with their final destination being St. Vincent or Grenada or other countries, which then decided that they can come to their countries. And in arrangements with the Chinese embassy, they were held overnight at Paragon and sent back to whence they'd come, back to Frankfurt, back to London. So for people to believe that we were welcoming everyone that was coming here is not certainly true. So indeed, Paragon has been used for quarantine. We've also been using Paragon when persons have had suspected, in most cases, persons who have suspicions, you suspect that they might have coronavirus. The test is done, and they're taken to Paragon. Sometimes a lot of the tests were done at Paragon. You took them there, where they were quarantined, masked, and kept there until the results came back. So we have Paragon being used as quarantine and isolation center for those who are mild to moderate. In addition, there's the Defense Force Field Hospital, which can normally accommodate about 10 intensive care and about 40 normal persons. When I say normal, I mean in terms of isolation. And it is felt that that will be brought into use if we need it. So you will have your 38, you have 78 beds in one area, you have 6 at the QH. You can have an additional 48 for isolation with this field hospital. And indeed, in the Aliens, Canterbury, and St. Lucie District Hospital, I should say in the case of St. Lucie District Hospital, a ward had been outfitted back in the time of SARS, and that has had to be quickly refurbished. And both Aliens, Canterbury, and St. Lucie District Hospital can provide accommodation for 30 persons in terms of quarantine. We have gone further and recognized that there are persons who, having COVID, could also develop an acute appendicitis and would need surgery. It can't be done in Harsons. It can't be done in the Ebola Center. And you would have to offer them services. There could be a diabetic lady who has an infected abscess who needs surgery. It is not going to be done in those centers. And we recognize that we then have to make provision for those people too. And so we have had discussions with private sector entities which provide hospitals, whatever, and operating theater facilities, whereby we will be in a position to pay for services for those persons, so that we try to maintain the sterility as it relates to coronavirus at the QH. I'm not saying that at the end of the day, that patient with coronavirus will not find his or her way to the QH, but we are certainly pulling out all the stops to ensure that that institution is protected as far as possible. Now, all of these things that I'm talking about, apart from the 30 million that has been in terms of recapitalization of the QH, we've had to find additional funds in terms of the rehabilitation and the restructuring and the facility and the work that has to be done at Harrison's Point in terms of the refurbishment. That has cost over $20 million. In addition to doing it, we've had to provide for the equipment, and I believe quite a substantial amount. Initially, there was a supplementary of 8.8 million, but there was an additional supplementary in terms of providing vital equipment. I said QH should order ventilators, but Harrison's also needs ventilators. And ventilators have been ordered along with other pieces of equipment, monitors. You've had to outfit it in terms of an oxygen system, in terms of cleaning, in terms of the negative pressure which is necessary in an ICU setting, in terms of the movement of airflow. All of these things. You're taking Harrison's these buildings, which were just buildings, roofs, good structures, and doing all of this to them in terms of passing gases and all of this. And this is a tremendous amount of work, and perhaps I should at this point really commend the private sector contractors who are doing this work for the alacrity with which they are bringing to this work, recognizing that the Honorable Prime Minister was firm that persons were not to be taken away from government departments to be diverted there, but that government work should continue wherever it was being done. And I believe for all of this, the government should be commended in terms of the detail, in terms of the preparation. There is the health EOC that meets every day, and then there's an expanded EOC Emergency Operating Committee that meets to discuss what is happening day by day. We've had issues with the cruise liners, which have been, sometimes a little difficult, sometimes requiring some persuasion, sometimes requiring some shouting. But in all, I think we have managed it quite well. And I think many of you would have seen, again, our commitment, and the Prime Minister has spoken about it, to these cruise liners, especially those at home port in Barbados, where we can have them. They have to get back to where they originated, primarily the United Kingdom, where we've been able to facilitate a very efficient method of side ship to airport, to clearing side, in terms of allowing them to disembark and to leave Barbados without, I'm not going to say nil contact with Barbadians, but certainly minimal contact, and taking all the necessary precautions. Persons would have heard about a cruise liner with one positive case at one time, and a crew member who was isolated, who had been ill for 2 days on the ship, and they'd asked us to facilitate the test for humanitarian grounds, but they had a person on the ship isolated, and they were not sure of the diagnosis, and we assisted by doing the testing, and that was positive, and that individual remained isolated on that ship. 2 or 3 other persons who were there, who were members of crew, who were also isolated because of similar symptoms, were tested the next day, and they were also positive. And those 4 persons have remained isolated on that ship. And the crew, obviously the crew have not been allowed, no crew from the ship. There was no ship to shore leave. And I believe plans are being made for those persons, those members of crew, to, I think it was in terms of the ship being able to leave, but with the crew, remember that 4 crew members are positive. So we've had our challenges, and there is a plan that we've had, the National Preparedness Plan. This has been spoken about in one good thing in terms of this entire process has been the sensitization and the education of the general public in Barbados, and they've been kept abreast of what is happening. Questions have been asked and answered. Sometimes the same question is asked and answered repeatedly. But we are doing it because we understand people are worried. Some people are generally scared, they're fearful. Persons generally tend to be fearful of the unknown, apart from politicians, I dare say, that seem to want to go everywhere. And I believe that is why this distinguished colleague on the other side has never really ventured into elective politics, because he has this morbid fear of the unknown and likes to be able to speak about things even if they're not absolutely correct. But Mr. President, Mr. President, I believe that we have been doing very well. As I said earlier, this is not an government versus the rest. This is a matter for all of Barbados. This is indeed a time. And I must, commend us as a people. We've really come together in terms of facing this possible scourge of the coronavirus. There's still some work to be done. There's still pockets of persons who don't believe anything that is said, who have their own theories and have their own facts about everything. But this is to be expected in a society, especially in a democratic society. Persons might ask, in terms of the spread of this disease and the containment, the social media is there, and they would have heard of, and most of them would have seen the Imperial College model, and if you should mitigate or if you should suppress. And in terms of suppression, again, the whole concept of the cultural norms and cultural behavior of Barbadians has to be taken into consideration, where there are very strict guidelines in terms of suppression, as akin to what happened in Wuhan in China, where, the government just mandates and does certain things. You shall not do this, you shall not move, you shall go here. And in terms of imposing that on Barbados, I think would be extremely difficult, and we might not necessarily achieve the results that you want. Barbadians generally tend to conform to rules and regulations, but I believe that when you try to encase people in a sort of cocoon that they feel is tightening on them, that they will try to escape from it. And I believe in our situation we have to find a blend between mitigation and in terms of suppression, and that is what the government is doing. No need to bring out this strong arm tactics and all of this, but let us gradually work on this project together as a project. Mr. President, in addition to what I've said, there are obviously going to be plans for, at this point in time, testing is centralized, where persons will be polyclinics, some polyclinics will be set up as screening centers. And I believe you're all aware that at this point in time, you're advised not to go to doctors, but to call them if you have symptoms, or flu symptoms, and certainly not to go to the accident and emergency department. As expected, that persons will be directed to these polyclinics, which will be screening centers, and depending where they'll be assessed and where they will be tested if necessary. And as I said earlier, they will be quarantined while pending those results after they're tested. The issue of testing has been one that's been debated globally. And I often say to friends who ask, why can't you just go and get a test? Senator Rogers could go and get a test today. It probably would be negative. It probably, because it could very well be positive. It could be negative today, but 2 weeks from now, in spite of his tissues that he has there, blowing his nose with, in spite of that, 2 weeks from now, he could be positive. How often do you test an individual if testing is available for everyone? How often? Do you go once a week? Do you go twice a week? How often do you go? And indeed, we have adopted a very sensible and scientific method. We look at, especially in terms of contact tracing, in terms of your presentation, your symptoms, and assess. It is subjective, but certainly you assess the person if this is some person who I should really be testing for this case. And that is the method that we have been adopting. There are plans to buy, I believe it is 2,500 test kits, new test kits in the first case. I received, again, a notification, and in terms of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you may be asking why the interest of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It all has to do with foreign affairs matters. And all night, for example, last night, I got an email in terms of a certain Alibaba and Jack Ma Foundation where they want to give test kits, 1,500, and protective clothing and ventilators. And, these are the things that you have to do. You are on the phone and you are meeting with the ambassador of Cuba, trying to work out how many Cuban nurses will be needed to help in terms of human resources requirements to deal with this. How many doctors and which specialties, recognizing that in terms of critical care and respiratory specialists that we are deficient. And sometimes I know that some people in Barbados have an aversion to the name, to the word Cuba, and indeed to a Cuban trained doctor. But the reality is that they've been doing human service globally. Indeed, there are Cuban doctors and nurses in Italy, they're in Central America, they were even in China. And we will see that around us, I believe they got the idea from us because I knew who spoke about it first. We've seen Jamaica, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica going for Cuban people, Cuban nurses and doctors to assist them. So that is the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in this regard. It is not that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is taking on any role with health, as was said by certain persons on some Facebook page. In addition, there's a lot of talk in terms of treatment of COVID, and the jury is out. There are some drugs that we've used for treatment of malaria that have been shown to be useful. There have been certain antiretrovirals which have been useful. But there's a lot of excitement about interferon alpha B, which is coming from Cuba. And interferons have been around for a while. They're used in viral illnesses. They're used in this other one. I'm losing my memory, Mr. President. I hope it is not. No. It's not a symptom of COVID. It is not. Anyhow, in some disease, not dementia, Mr. President, through you. That might be afflicting the honorable member on the other side, but not yet me. But certainly it's been around for a while, and they've had, apparently, in terms of papers written, good success in China and other countries in terms of this interferon. And indeed, Barbados has ordered some of the interferon from Cuba to be used, hopefully, if we have to, because as I said, the majority of our cases have thus far been mild to moderate cases, and I sincerely hope that it remains like that. Mr. President, I believe I've said more than I should have said in terms of this whole matter of COVID and the corona pandemic. In terms of other matters which this government is addressing this year, we are still hoping to push ahead with some of the projects, capital projects, especially in the tourism and hospitality industry. There's still ongoing work at Sam Lodge. There's still the planned construction of Hyatt. I believe the Caribbean Hotel is to rebuild as a new 170-room hotel. We know that Blue Horizons is on the horizon. There's certain hotels, I know, and the Royalton Hotel is to be built. And indeed, there's plans to build a hotel in Bridgetown. In the old Costa Busson site, they're supposed to be the owners of that property have submitted plans already for the construction of a 6 or 7-story hotel. There are plans for the construction of hotel and entertainment and condo facilities across in the Payhead development. In what is now a waterfront area, there's plans for that development. So I think government is still moving ahead in terms of its capital projects. The paving of the tarmac at the Grantley Adams International Airport, that continues. And we are moving along with those projects. In terms of the actual Barbados and in terms of development, the SBRC, in terms of environment, the Ministry of Environment, and disposal of solid waste, where government was paying about $24 million a year in terms of the contract. Through negotiations with the entity, that has been reduced now to $13 million. So government is now saving about $11 million annually, which it was paying. And indeed, they're looking further now of having a green energy park in that area at Vaucluse, with both the government and the private sector will work together, and hopefully it will remove the need for government to be paying that $13 million. It will be part of its government's equity. The botanical gardens is going on as expected, and persons are employed in that area and indeed in the beautification under the NCC, which again becomes very useful in a time like this when people are being displaced from work. The Ministry of Transport and Works continues to do its extensive road works, and you would have heard the Honorable Prime Minister speak in the other chamber about the $24 million that has been paid, and we await the arrival of electric buses. However, in the interim, they've been able to replace engines and chassis in certain buses, and I believe the bus availability has moved from probably to the lower 40s, and I believe it's now averaging about 70 to 80 on a daily basis. So there are indeed improvements in the transport sector of this country. Another area which I haven't spoken about, I'll mention briefly, in terms of COVID, has to do with agriculture and the vital necessity to have food security. And again, in this regard, government has put at the disposal of farmers, there's $24 million in the Agricultural Development Fund in terms of bringing lands back into use urgently and focusing on the 6 to 12-week crops in terms of being able to provide at relatively short time a vital nutrients and nutrition for our people in this country. And I think it is something that has to be addressed, and we're looking at it seriously in terms of food security. COVID has its good aspect, has its bad aspects, it's bad, but in terms of allowing us to see our vulnerability in terms of food security and in terms of manufacturing, it certainly allows us to see these are two areas that we need to focus. I know in terms of scale, people just ignore Barbados in terms of manufacturing, but this gives us an opportunity to stop back and look at certain things that if we had a stronger manufacturing sector, could have been in a position to mitigate what is going on at this point in time. Mr. President, I believe in these circumstances that in terms of the appropriation bill, as I said at the beginning, it is a different debate. Normally, I know it is a 2-hour debate, and I think that in these circumstances, having noted the programs of various ministries haven't been dealt with in detail in the other place, I don't think I need to rehash what I said, especially what I said earlier in terms of the provisions of expenditure and revenue, and certainly the expenditure in these ministries would be based on the revenue. And it is all very fluid at this point in time in terms of the projections, in terms of if the GDP of Barbados will decrease by 1% or 2%, if the tourism sector will be affected by 40% or 80%. So we are still looking at the numbers and the projections. And I believe in these circumstances, there's no need to really go into programs and what we plan to do, not being sure in terms of revenue what we will have to do these things with. What I want to say before I exit, however, is indeed government is being prepared, and even in terms of the provision of medication for persons, we recognize that with the effects in terms of trade and supplies in this country, it is vitally important that we know. For instance, I know that Provision of Drug Service is working on ensuring that we have 6 months supplies of drugs, recognizing the numerous persons in Barbados who depend on drugs for the treatment of chronic diseases, and indeed for asthma especially, but also for all the other conditions that affect us in Barbados. And provision has been made for the drug service to more or less ensure that the warehouses in Barbados, you can call it stockpile drugs, to cover Barbadians for at least 6 months. And indeed, there will be a process where persons, if we reach stage 3, where persons will be allowed, especially the elder people, to have at least to get 3 months supply of medication to allow them not to have to go to pharmacies every month. As it relates to other supplies, I think Barbadians are doing quite well. I think most of them have stockpiled what they think they will need. But we've recognized that there's certain things that we've been seeing, certain trends, when we look at the information from the Ministry of Commerce in terms of certain shortages of certain vitally important things, and these are things that we have to address. I'm not going to mention them here to create any further panic out there in terms of persons trying to grab what is left of that. Suffice it to say, Mr. President, we are all in this together. The appropriation bill is before us. I commend it to honorable members, but I caution them in terms of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And this is a time when we must all come together and work in the interests of Barbados and Barbadians. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President, and I beg that this appropriation bill be now read a second time. Thank you.
Senator Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. I do not propose to be long. And I'm very serious about that. We are now located in the centrally air-conditioned building. Even though we have a few months to place ourselves 3 feet apart, we're breathing the same air. So I don't know if that matters. I'm not a scientist. So those things worry me. And I don't want to be here longer than I have to be. This appropriation bill, I do not understand why. I do not understand why we are dealing with it in the first place at this point. It is not constitutionally required for the Senate to weigh in on this bill and pass it. Certainly we cannot amend, we cannot delay, we cannot do anything about the appropriation bill because it is a money bill. And the Senate has no authority to deal with money bills. We can talk about it, we can make some good points on a lot of issues, but at the end of the day, it does not matter what anybody in here says about the appropriation bill. We can do nothing about it. We can't send it back to the House because we see something wrong with it. We just can't do anything about it. But so the usefulness of having this bill debated in the Senate, especially at this time with the coronavirus and the ensuing disease, COVID-19, so much in the air, I do not understand why the Senate would have to convene to put me at risk. I do not understand. I suppose there are so many of you on the other side that you could afford to lose one or two. There are only two opposition people. One is not here, but you know, if you look at that, you put me. So, Mr. President, I would propose that we get through this thing very quickly and spare me the dreaded fear of being here among some of you who might have contracted or been in contact with people who had this. The good senator. Especially solutions. Yeah, this good senator, you know, when we had the problem with the cruise ship, he wouldn't leave his bed. He went not there at all. I don't blame him. You know, he wouldn't go. So I understand it, and I don't even find fault with him. But sir, I said all of that because I know, you know, we like to grandstand, especially on these occasions, and say how much the government has done for the country and what they were going to do and plan stuff. So all that is moot now, you know, because public officers will have worked hard preparing these estimates. Trust me on that. They went to the lower house and they were debated. But first of all, they were going to cabinet, and cabinet would have approved them. And they were debated in your new style that you started last year that is quite erroneous, but you like the show. Because let me try to address that a little bit, sir. I can't help it. The estimates are prepared by civil servants initially. And then the civil servants, along with the PS, go to the minister, and the minister decides, well, yes, we're going to take this one, and we're not going to take this one, and you see what the particular government ministry will do. And they send them off to the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance then cuts back and do whatever they have to do with the estimates. And then they go to Cabinet. Cabinet then approve the estimates as being fit to be presented to the House. And then the House debates them. The format that started last year, I have seen cabinet ministers who approved the estimates in cabinet coming to the House and asking questions about the same estimates that they approved. Now, could there? If you didn't understand them or they weren't relevant, why would you approve them in cabinet in the first place? So you're not questioning things that you approve. It makes a mockery out of the whole exercise of the estimates. I suppose it might have been good if you had a larger opposition and government ministers didn't want to pretend to be opposition people and question their own work. Because the estimates that come to the House comes in the name of the cabinet, not in any particular minister's name. So they're approved by all members of cabinet. So if you approve them, you should know what you're approving. But we have this grand show on TV and civil servants who have no reason to be in the House speaking, have absolutely no reason to be in the House speaking, are in there, some of them make better and embarrassed. That is not their role. They advise ministers, and the most important function of a minister is to account for government's money. And you are taking that job away from yourselves and giving it to civil servants who didn't sign up for that. As a matter of fact, civil servants should not be speaking in the House and answering questions unless they are testifying before some committee of Parliament. But no, the minister is, in our new system, abdicating his role for whatever reason. Either they're not competent to do it, so they have to get some people to do it for them. And if you're not competent, you should let the Prime Minister know up front and say, well, don't make me minister because I can't have it. Not give work to people who didn't sign up for it. And I know of 2 people last year, 2 public servants, who end up in difficulty having gone before that standing committee, standing finance committee, call it, and talk all over their face and then have in trouble. Yeah. You know, and I thought this year some of them would have been cautious and not proceed on this road again, but through fear. I understand through fear they have gone again and done this exercise, which was basically ministers asking other ministers questions that he should have already known, or he should not have voted to send the estimates to the House. But be that as it may. But as I was saying earlier, these estimates of revenue have not gone through the chute. The government cannot now really project the income that is going to receive in this current situation. True enough, all of the government, this is this COVID-19 coronavirus thing that has taken a toll on our tourist arrivals. But tourism is the driver of our economy right now. Well, it was the driver up to last week. And with the hotels closing and the airlines shutting down, not coming to Barbados, all of the estimates of revenue have to be relooked. Government cannot really project what it's planning to do based on money that it knows it's not going to get right now. I'm not blaming the government for it, as I said, because we didn't invite the COVID here.
True.
You know, and we didn't, it isn't our fault, it isn't the government's fault. And as I said elsewhere, the government is doing its best. Sometimes I might think even erroneous, but I will not make that an issue, because we can have no political divide on the way we proceed with this issue. This is not a political thing. I have subscribed to certain what do you call them? Websites now that give you up-to-date information on what is happening, and it's dreadful. Italy on Saturday lost 793 people. When I say lost, I mean people died. Sunday they did a little better. They lost 651. So this is not sport that we are making. Pardon the pun, but this is deadly serious. And government has taken certain measures. Some of them, I think, in the enforcement. Not what the government has come with these recommendations, but what we're doing doesn't make sense. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I went to the supermarket. The wife sent me out. And when I got there was this huddle of people outside the supermarket in the sun. Mind you, the only thing good about that was you would get some vitamin D. And the supermarket letting them 1 and 2 when somebody come out. I left that supermarket, I had too many people, and I went to another one. Same thing. But the people, you're practicing social distancing, they call it. But the people outside the supermarket were standing on each other's feet, bundling up. And you letting them through inside the supermarket. So it's okay to contract the virus outside the supermarket, not inside. What we are doing is nonsense. Doesn't make sense. Right? But we are all panicking. I remember when it first started, people were panic buying when the supermarket, like how they do when they have storms. And they even buy all the toilet paper. I still to this day do not understand the connection between toilet paper and the COVID-19 disease or the coronavirus. I still don't understand to this day. Mind you, I had to buy some for the office. And I went to the cashier and she told me, put them there. And I said, sweetheart, put them in a bag. I'm not prepared to go outside and be robbed. Because it has become a precious commodity. We are panicking, and you see, the thing is, and it is not because we are not educating the people. When I go by my mother and I watch TV, because that's the only time I watch TV, I see JS announcements and all kinds of things on the TV telling people what to expect. But nonetheless, people seem to be ignoring the government's advice, listening to people who know nothing about what they're talking about and doing the wrong thing. Last week, I got a call from some of my members at the airport. The people who were doing the air-to-sea transfer, air-to-sea to air transfer, they call it, they were being checked by security. And one lady started to cough, like, like obviously like a sponge dog. Yeah, get frightened. First thing comes to your mind, COVID. Get scared. Call me. The most non-medical person I know. I am a hypochondriac to be so I get frightened of coughs and things. But they called me. They wanted simple things like a mask and gloves. I know that the mask and gloves would not have protected them because I read somewhere that the virus can even enter your body through your eyes. But rather than give the people peace of mind now, because it was peace of mind, give them the mask to give, because when you're wearing the mask, that mask protects the member of the public from you. Because if you cough, that mask keeps your cough in. It is not protecting you from anybody out there. But for peace of mind, the airport should have handed over the gloves and things to the people and get the work done. But they endured a work stoppage because they didn't want to give up masks because it didn't look good. You're worrying about looking good now. At the point, and people are afraid. People are panicking. So, the CEO of the airport, chief of security, some HR people and one or two others did the work of the security guards because for the lack of giving them a pair of gloves. A pair of cheap gloves. But it don't look good. You can't worry about looking good now. This thing has caused panic and fear to spread out, irrational fear in some instances. Me, I get frightened too. Like yesterday when I went to the supermarket, I went up to get me some Vex when I went inside, I said, and people start to run. Just fear. Simple fear. You know? I was outside with that same, the woman who ran, I was outside with her standing in front of me, you know. I made a letter saying, and I made the thing. She was talking to me, I was talking to her, but she ran. But for the last 20 minutes, we were outside standing talking. You see, it is fear. And it is panic that we have to control in this society. We're talking about closing the borders. It's already here. If you close your borders, you're not going to keep it out. And in any event, closing the borders, again, will be moot because who are you closing them to? Ain't coming. The ships ain't coming. The airlines have shut down. So yes, you close the borders. But close them to what? Nothing ain't coming. The airlines have said after today, I think somebody said today, some yesterday, and on Thursday, they are not coming to Barbados anymore. Because in some instances, the airlines don't have anybody to fly down here with. People are afraid. So we have the virus already in this country. We know that we have it. They've tested, people have tested positive. Thankfully, we haven't had any deaths as far as my information tells me. So we haven't had none, and I'm hoping that it remains that way. Again, people are panicking. I will not speak about this thing unless I speak about the effect on workers. Yesterday, I saw some nonsense in the newspaper where one bank is saying that if you get in contact with somebody, one of your family members tested positive or whatever, you will stay home for 14 days, and that will be your vacation. That will be your vacation. They can't do that. There are still laws in Barbados, you know. COVID has not brought a state of emergency to this country so far. And we have not suspended any laws in Barbados. So you still have to treat the workers based on what the normal laws. If you don't want them to come to work, you lay them off, or you do whatever you have to do. But if you don't pay them, you have just suspended me without pay. Suspension without pay is dismissal. The laws have not changed. Sorry, suspension without pay unless there is something in your contract. Otherwise, you can't do it. So you're telling people they can't come to work and you can stay home, you can take your vacation. No, it is not your vacation. As a matter of fact, you have to give people 2 weeks notice of vacation in order for the vacation to be valid. So yes, the employer can tell you when to take vacation, but he must give you at least 2 weeks notice. So how is coming into work in the morning and you hear, I hear your aunt went to New York and she came back and so you don't come work. How are you going to get 2 weeks inside there? Now, if you don't want them in your place, as you have a right to, you can't take it from the vacation though. So that is just a warning to that particular bank and any others who want to try that nonsense. They cannot use the COVID-19 disease and the coronavirus to take advantage of workers. There's still procedures settled in the law for you to follow if you want to even lay off. I hear some people shut down last week. They didn't go to the chief labor officer and get permission to send home people without going through the process. They just shut down because, okay, we can do it with COVID, and they're happy. Because some of them want to get rid of some people for a long time, but they had no basis for doing so. And having done so, now they're going to blame it on COVID. COVID and coronavirus cannot be used as an excuse for people to mistreat workers in Barbados. It has started. It has started. I want them to pull back. They're asking government for assistance, but they're asking government for assistance for their bottom lines. They're not asking for assistance to keep workers employed. But thankfully, we have a national insurance system that should take care of people who are ill from the disease. And if you lay them off, they can get unemployment benefits. I don't know how long that will last with government building fire stations and all kinds of things, all the people money. We need the money for times like now, not fire stations. Remember I cautioned you about using national trust money when that debate came up. We never thought for 1 minute that those funds would be called into service so soon. Nobody expected this. November last year, nobody knew anything about COVID. As a matter of fact, the only people who knew anything about it before January this year, before the 31st of December this year, were in China. And then this thing spread like wildfire within a few months. And it's threatened every society, this world. People, I can't get over the fact that Italy now has more deaths than China. What must happen though, is we have to look and see what Italy has done wrong to make sure we don't repeat those same mistakes, because for the good of this country, we can't afford, if Italy lost 790 something one day and then 651 the next. If Barbados loses 10 people in a day, everybody in this room would know somebody is gone. When I pick up the newspaper on Sundays, every Sunday I see somebody I know. And so you can imagine if this pandemic really gets hold in Barbados. So what we have to do, sir, is a test. Test, and then test, and then test again. Even though I could have been in contact with some person today and got tested the same day, had no symptoms, had nothing. And then next week, I have symptoms. This thing is dangerous. I told the Prime Minister last week, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now. Because, one, I certainly don't know what to do. I don't. I readily admit that. I don't admit that. I take offense at that, puppet. I certainly don't know what to do. I would never do that. I know the president too long. I know better. And the president didn't say anything.
I didn't hear it.
You see? I told her that I will support whatever action she take, because you got to do something. We just can't throw up our hands. And I might sound like I'm speaking on behalf of the government, no, but I'm not. I'm speaking on behalf of Barbados. If the Prime Minister closes the borders, the people who suffer any loss as a result of the closing of the borders will oppose her. They'll be vexed. If she opens the borders and the virus, even though it's here, and people know it's here, she didn't close the borders, so the virus coming, so it's a lose-lose situation for her. And I don't envy her that position. I don't envy her at all this role. I'm particularly worried about her myself, because I've seen that she's been working very hard to
I worry about it too.
to get on top of this thing. The problem is, sir, if she breaks down, her second 11 team ain't gonna be able to handle this thing, you know. So I want good health for her. You know, I want her to be able to continue, you know, because she ain't got much talent behind her. So I'm very serious about that. You know, so let us all pray that she stands up. I didn't see her for 2 days, and they started to get worried, you know. Like I didn't say yesterday or Saturday, and I saw other ministers, and I said, oh Lord, send my Prime Minister now. So let me put that to rest, and hopefully that she will let me see her, and I will disabuse my mind. I will disabuse my mind of any plans. Right? Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, at that consultation with the Prime Minister last week, I saw the panic and the fear in the faces and in the speeches of business people. Even one who called in on Zoom started to cry. I'm not going to call his name because I'm too embarrassed for him. But these people were not taking care of workers and to their benefits. Because only before I went to his workplace to represent a man who made a mistake, one single mistake in 26 years, a mistake that cost that company nothing. They didn't lose any revenue, they didn't lose any goodwill. As a matter of fact, they gained some goodwill because the guy was doing something for the company, but he rushed. I didn't print the bill. The man still paid, and he lost his job. So all this kinds of fancy thing talking about, oh, we're taking care of workers, they're taking care of workers. They're using this opportunity to pretend because they want government handouts. I am warning people that I'm still looking. Tony is still looking. And we are not going to allow employers to get away with nonsense. Agriculture, production, I want to talk about that. I come from a rural area. Both my parents work in agriculture. Both of them had plots of land where we got a lot of food. We never went hungry because they always had food growing in the area. They weren't rich, but we never went hungry. Mind you, the pieces of land that my parents had are still there, and I don't plant a corn. But that's the same thing with the plantations too. If you look at the plantations that surrounding the area where I come from, Vaucluse, Jukes, Content, Danscombe, Farmers, Hopewell, the only thing that is growing on them things is cabbage and some other bush, river tamarind and that kind of stuff. No food. I used to go and dig my own yams and stuff when I wanted them. But now, very few people are planting food, and the food is expensive as a result. And then we have to import yams and things from St. Lucia. But we got land idle in Barbados. And we want to know why we're not using it? Because importers have been bringing cheap, inferior stuff for years and have been putting our farmers out of business with it. A lot of genetically modified stuff that they can't use in some countries, but we're using here. Well, this is the time now, sir, where government, in these estimates, or when they revise them, because they have to be revised, have to put some money into agriculture to make sure that our food import bill, or that also is down, but that we do not have to rely on importation. Because right now, if the Prime Minister closes the borders at some point, the food coming over the borders too, you know. They're not going to put the food on barges and remote control them into Barbados. So if you close the borders to ships, they still got to make exceptions for food because we don't have enough to feed ourselves. And that is a crying shame for a society that, when it was a boy, produced most of the food that we ate, except for rice, because we don't grow rice, but yams, sweet potatoes, others, stuff that you don't even see now. Because it is not viable to import, but our variety of food, and as a matter of fact, now the young people today don't eat a lot of stuff, a lot of ground provisions, because they're being a macaroni pie. And as a result, we have a sick society based on the diet. Because what they import, a lot of is inferior. And you have things like a lot of sweet jams and jellies and stuff that they import. Go to the supermarket shelves and see how many Belgian jellies and stuff are on the shelves. Look and see how many come from overseas. So we need to put money into agriculture. And I agree with Senator Walker that we got to start doing it quickly. These crops that produce things in 3 months and stuff, but we still got to go and plant some of the other ones too. Because we don't only need the 3 month stuff, we need the ones that take a little longer. That will stop us from importing. We will get through this. But we have to take the lessons from this COVID-19 to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we have been making for years. I know we had a former member of this place, who was the CEO of the Agricultural Society, and he's been preaching to the wind about food security. And he's been generally ignored even by his party when they were in power. Yeah, especially by his party when they're in power. You know? But now his words will come back to haunt us because we do not have the amount of food to last us for a few weeks. We are talking about you want so much import cover for a thing. If we don't want so much money for import cover, if we're producing our own food. We need, you know they say you need 12 weeks import cover to look good. If we had that same amount of money and we weren't importing all this food, go to the supermarket, go to the supermarket shelves and tell me how many of the products in the supermarket, food products, were grown in Barbados. We need to start doing that. We need to give people incentives. If we have to subsidize farmers in Barbados, then let us do so. Because Barbados is one of the few countries that don't subsidize farming, you know. Look at the EU. They subsidize everything. Milk production, food production, all kinds of things. Because, but not mind you, if we do it, they will say, oh, we're breaking, what do you call it? Some sort of rules. WTO, thank you so much. But we're going to break them if it is in our best interest. Thank you very much. WTO rules. This WTO keeps us in subjection and forces us to buy inferior, low-cost food, but ours could be lower if we subsidize our farmers. We need to subsidize farming in Barbados, and this coronavirus thing has shown us that we must. I was at a place last week to get some medication for someone who was ill. I went to collect the medication for them. And while I was there, I could hear the staff talking among themselves, and they said, you know, the shipment of Dettol that we were supposed to get, they call it back. They take care of themselves. Outside world, they take care of themselves. They make it happen in Barbados, you know. They may say, could they Barbados order this thing before the virus or level sent it down? It was on the way, and the people turned it back and said, look, it didn't leave the airports yet, so they said, bring it back. We have to be prepared to take care of ourselves. Nobody will do it for us. Mr. President, I talk a lot of stuff, and I didn't mention the estimates much. Because there are much in the estimates that you can't talk about, especially, as I said, they're no longer relevant. But my fear, sir, is that if we are not getting the amount of money coming in the government coffers, the amount going out can be reduced in somewhere. And I do not want to see it being reduced like what both administrations in the past have been doing. Workers first. There have been, every time there is a crisis in this country and there's any sacrifice to be made, it has been at the expense of the working class, the people who do the work. I said the last set of layoffs we had, we sent home people who were actually doing the work and keep the people who were sent down getting them instructions. The one before that, in 2014, same thing. You send home the workers to save pennies when you can save pounds by sending home a chief. For example, right now we have about 26 ministries, 26 ministers, and some ministers have more than one permanent secretary. The salary of a permanent secretary is 6 times that of a fellow at bottom. We don't need all those ministries, and we certainly don't need all those permanent secretaries then. So if you want to stay home, amalgamate. And then you don't need all those ministers. And save the people who, because look, you have people at the bottom who live paycheck to paycheck. And if there's a permanent secretary who lives paycheck to paycheck, he should be a permanent secretary. Because he's responsible for the ministry's money, he can't handle his. So we need to protect the most vulnerable. I saw the Prime Minister making some comment about that. I think it was not Sunday yesterday, Sunday last week. Newspaper, was that? Newspaper, some paper, saying we have to take care of the most vulnerable in this crisis. No, we don't have to take care of the most vulnerable in this crisis. We have to take care of the most vulnerable, period. And that's something we have not been doing. And I've spoken about it here on more than one occasion. The coronavirus is scary, but it's also as scary as the people who were in receipt of pensions. They were in receipt of pensions. Government has illegally removed those pensions from them, and by now they should know that what they did was wrong. And they have not taken steps to return them. I have a list of several government pensioners, I'm talking about government pensioners, who were declared medically unfit. And for some reason, the government decided, the last administration decided, on advice from people who can't read and understand, that the invalidity benefit is a pension and they should reduce their pension from the government by the amount they get in invalidity benefits. As a result, those persons have now become the most vulnerable people in society because they can't pay their mortgages, and some they can't buy food, they can't pay light bill, they can't buy everything. So with this new conversion to government, this understanding of government that you must take care of the most vulnerable, I want them to look back. because those people are going to be at risk, because a lot of them are people with chronic diseases who can't work. They can't work. These are not people who are playing the fool and malingering, because they have been certified medically unfit by some of our top medical professionals in this country, and they are home suffering. Now, they are home suffering now, before this coronavirus thing kicks in. Government owes them money. Government mistakenly took it away. One or two people made some noise and government gave back some of them, but there were a hell of a lot more that need to get their monies back with back pay. And I'm going to go through it one last time in this chamber. In 1975, the then government, and I said governments all the time do this nonsense, want to balance the books, so they decided they can take it on the workers. So they decided that people coming in after the 1st of September 1975 will no longer get a national insurance pension and the government pension. But what they said is, if the national insurance pension, if the government pension exceeds what you get from the national insurance pension, your national insurance pension the government pension will be reduced by the amount you get from national insurance. So people who started to work prior to 1st of 1975 will get both pensions, and after you get one. Mind you, the exception was parliamentarians didn't suffer that. They sat down in Parliament and tricked the country, back in 1975. So when people talking about how great they were and all kind of stuff, these were people taking advantage of people way back then. Yes, it was the way excellent everybody that did it. That's history. This isn't, I've even heard people in my discussions over the years trying to blame it on Tom Adams. I had to tell him he came in public in 76. Excuse me. Because it is shameful what they've done. But mind you, in the regulations, and everybody want to write this down, General Order 84 says that it will be reduced, your pension from the Treasury will be reduced by the amount you get as an old age contributory pension. The old age contributory pension is payable when you reach pensionable age under the National Insurance Scheme. So you get that old age pension at 67. So we have some people who are 45, 50, 52, 60, who have had their pensions reduced before they reach old age, the age under the National Insurance Scheme. Government knows this. I've said it here regularly enough. I've done it on the radio. I've spoken to several of you. And nobody's doing anything about it now, because government wants to save money on the backs of workers, people who work in government departments and suffered as a result. Because some of these people have respiratory illnesses, they can't go back to work because of the buildings that government put them to work in, And then after you send them home medically unfit, you then leave them there to languish in poverty. Now let me explain to you why it is so devastating. Some of these people have mortgages. So when they got the pension from the Treasury, that used to take care of the mortgage payment. When they get the pension from National Insurance, that would buy the food and pay some of the light bill and the water bill, and that $45 increase that you put on the water bill for these most vulnerable people. But now, you have decided that you're going to reduce it by the amount they get from the National Insurance, so they're no longer getting enough to pay the mortgage. So some of them have houses up for sale, while government is pussyfooting with their monies and not returning it. Because look, when you go to get a mortgage, the people assess your payback to coincide with your retirement age. So that when you reach retirement age, the banks got back the money or the credit unions got back the money. But people get sick in the interim. You had insurance that would have covered you and you would still be able to pay your mortgage. That's what's called insurance, it's national insurance. So they would know that when they reach retirement age, that you're not going to get the two pensions, so their mortgage would still be covered during the time, during that period with the pension that they get until 67. And government has taken it away. So some of these people are suffering as a result of not being able to buy food because they want to keep a roof over their head. And some of these banks are so callous, they don't have any mercy. They don't even have the mercy with their staff when they're telling you that if you start home because your family's sick and you got corona is in the air, they can take out your vacation. That's not caring. You know what amazed me though? Is that these people who are doing it to their workers look like the same workers that they're doing it to. These are black people treating black people bad. They don't care. They've gotten up. So anybody at the bottom can be trampled upon. So please, if you remember nothing about this speech, remember that you need to fix, for the most vulnerable, their pensions that the government owes them. And if you don't remember anything else, remember that we need to provide subsidies for our farmers so that they can get the feed in this country once again. All right? Mr. Deputy President, I hope that my words have not fallen on deaf ears, and I do not know, as I said, I do not know what to do. I just know what's wrong, and it needs to be fixed. But I can highlight the areas. I don't have the skills to fix it. I know what's wrong, and I can point it to the government. I hope they listen. Sir, I'm much obliged for you indulging me in this debate because, as I said, it didn't have anything much to do with the actual estimates because they're no longer relevant. What we can do, sir, is to speed ourselves out of here so I don't contract that thing from anybody who might have it. I'll talk for a few minutes. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, sir. Yes, I think that Senator Franklin's speech was a well-measured speech. Almost a comforting kind of speech. Now, may I remind honorable senators that in the past we are accustomed to having everyone being entitled to their 1 hour delivery. But in as much as we are in these uncharted waters, we may want to just limit our speeches 1 and all. I think we can do at least one more speech before we go to break for lunch, and in the circumstances, I recognize Senator Alfie Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker and Mr. Deputy President. First of all, I would like to compliment the Prime Minister of Barbados for that huge humanitarian effort in accommodating those cruise passengers so that they can leave Barbados safely. Mr. Deputy President, I do believe that this is going to augur well for Barbados in the future because not only did we provide the space for the home porting of the ships, but we also accommodated those visitors to which our tourism product sincerely depended on. And I believe that in the future, when a number of these visitors are looking for a place to vacation, they would remember the effort that was done by Barbados and the Prime Minister and the government of Barbados to accommodate them. And I think it's going to serve us very well in the future. Also, I was thinking in terms of the stimulus package that the Prime Minister would have announced on Friday night in the other place. I know when a few months ago it was announced that part of the capital programs, expansion projects that we were looking at, that there would be mains replacements by the Barbados Water Authority on the, I think it's on the West Coast. You know, I think that now that a lot of persons are away from work and off the roads, that I would humbly say that now is a great time for the Barbados Water Authority to start those mains replacement program, and they can do it in peace. And obviously, it means that it will still be providing jobs for the people of Barbados. Indeed, in terms of a lot of the capital projects that was mentioned on Friday night, economic activity will still be going on in Barbados because, as the leader of government business said, it doesn't make sense rehashing a lot of the projects, but we know the Hyatt and the Sandals and the Indigo projects, those projects can still go on as long as the investors feel confident and assured that they can still put the money behind those projects. And even though the tourism aspect is not going in terms of the visitors arriving, the hotel plant, both new and old, can take the time to actually renovate and improve those projects as well. One of the things that I had suggested to someone in terms of the everybody's using this term, so I could as well use it to ramp up the space that you need for the quarantine facilities as well as maybe isolation facilities. I had suggested that the old Glendary's prison could probably be used as one of the space because it's all a building that, you know, it's in good stead now that it has been repaired after the fire. One of the other things that I had also suggested in the past was the hotline. I really felt that 536-4500, even people on the radio, moderators and so on, are calling out that number wrong, and even on television, people are calling it out wrong. I really think it should have been a 3-digit number, like 911 or 999, and it would be so easy for people to remember. And I think another new hotline is supposed to be going into effect from today under the Ministry of Elder Affairs, and it's a new number. So I think that if you had and somebody called 911, and depending on what the emergency is, they can be patched through there and then, rather than giving people so many numbers to call. And as I said, 536-4500 is a number people are not going to remember in an emergency. So I hope that that is not too late to fix that whole hotline issue. One of the positive things that could come out of this whole pandemic with the COVID virus is this whole question of Barbados moving in a hurry to being a cashless society and a lot of online transactions. I do feel, I see going around circulating today, email, WhatsApp messages where certain businesses are already advertising that people can order goods online, and it is really a great thing because it would reduce a lot of the interface contact. If you want to pay your bills, I noticed that the government has moved under the Ministry of Innovation and Smart Technology, Science and Smart Technology, to at least get things like the police certificate of character up and running online. So a lot of transactions, pay your land taxes, all those things would be able to be done online now, and people would not be so inconvenienced and standing in long queues, even at SurePay, because you can actually go to SurePay online and pay your bills. So I think that despite the fact that the pandemic is causing a lot of panic in the society, let's think positive and let's move our business transactions now to another level. And it would also reduce the whole question of theft, even at gas stations, so that persons will not have to be moving and walking around, with a lot of cash. And I believe in supermarkets and so on. When you order online, you can pay online. So certainly cashless transactions and a lot of online. So we might see a Barbados Amazon type business rising up very soon. And this will also push us into a direction of new businesses. And of course, it's the whole question of the church. I understand there's a video going around with our esteemed Senator Reverend Rogers preaching. I haven't seen it yet. And there are times when, and he was being encouraged this morning to produce more videos online and send them out, because he's an excellent preacher. He's at my church, St. George Parish Church, one of my favorite churches. And so there are a lot of things now that will be moving. There are a lot of churches that, listen, for this regathering, I had 3 parishes, okay? So St. Michael's, St. Matthew's is my home church. That's where it was christened. St. George Parish Church is my family church. And in Christ Church is the Wesleyan Holiness Church. So I'm saying that even religion can move online in Barbados, having our own local preachers like Reverend Rogers and our former Senator, Reverend Maxwell. And I think it's a great thing in terms of how the pandemic has pushed us. So, Mr. Deputy President, I was just very grateful to say those few words, and thank you very much for obliging me, and may God continue to bless the Prime Minister of Barbados as she continues in this journey of navigating Barbados through these perilous times. I thank you, sir.
We're saying that. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I rise also to add my voice to this debate and to speak in such a way that it is reflective of this current situation that we find ourselves in. Mr. Deputy President, as an educator myself, my focus naturally turns towards the educating of our nation's children. In that regard, I want to speak very briefly about some of the steps that the Ministry of Education are putting in place to ensure that our children are educated, are instructed, even as we go through this process. We struggle in this, what some refer to as a war against this virus. We must still be cognizant of the fact that our young people will still have to be taught. The difference is that now more than ever, more than before, the parental unit must play a greater role in the instruction of children in this country. And this particular pandemic, this situation, and this crisis that we find ourselves in today has shown us, if nothing else, how important it is to have alternatives to the traditional classroom environment, traditional ways of teaching. Of course, the Ministry of Education as the ministry with the mandate for instructing our teachers, our children, are putting measures in place to ensure that our children are not disadvantaged. And I'm going to speak to them, just briefly talk about the use of the G Suite platform, where teachers can use software such as Google Classroom, Google Meetings, to facilitate live online classes, virtual classes with their students, where they can interact with the students live, or they can set assignments for students to complete and submit at a later date. It's important that Barbados knows that we are still on the job, and even if the country closes down, that children could still access, there's still a facility for them to learn. But the children will be home for a while. And it's time for parents, as I said earlier, to step up to the plate and to embrace their role as first teacher. As first teacher. And I already saw the memes and the complaints on the social media where parents are praising teachers. They can't believe what teachers go through on a daily basis. And at that point, they were just about 2 days in? They were 2 days in to having to take care of their own children at home, and they were praising us. They were going crazy already. So you can imagine how teachers struggle on a daily basis. So what we want to do is give some of those parents who will have to, for sure, homeschool their children through this process. Of course, we would help as a ministry. The Ministry of Education will help, but they will have to take up the bulk of the teaching, as the children will be home for a while. And just a few tips just to get them started. Those parents must adopt a kind of homeschooling mindset. Must make in their mind that homeschooling is not anything that is any esoteric field that only trained persons can be involved, but anybody could engage in homeschooling. As a matter of fact, you taught your children in those early years before they went into nursery, before they went into primary, before they went to secondary school. So the skills are there. Yeah. What you may just need is some guidance. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of parents make when they try to teach their children at home is that, and some would probably make in this particular situation because it's new to them, is that they would try to keep a schedule that's very similar to that of what they saw on the child's timetable, very similar to what obtains at school. And you can't do that. You can't teach a child at home the way that the teacher would teach that child at school in that structured setting. There has to be more flexibility. So parents need to understand that, yes, some of them may be working from home, because a lot of us now realize the importance of working from home, and that is even possible, because before, for some of us, it didn't seem possible that you could work from home. But now we're realizing that it's very easily done. So now you have to work from home, and you have to teach your children or homeschool your children in some cases, assist with the teaching of your children. So you have that situation. You have to have that balance where you have to make time for yourself, make time for your job, but also you want to dedicate some of that time to your child so that your child will continue to learn. Now, children are in school for what? The learning takes maybe about 5 hours or so, but you don't need 5 hours if you're at home. You may just need 2. What is taught in school may be condensed, in 5 hours may be condensed into 2 hours. And you do not have to use a setting where you bring the children in a room and put them at the table with books and pen and pencil and try to teach as though you're in a classroom. No, use all the tools that you have at your disposal. I think it was that ministry that would have compiled a number of links and websites that parents can use to homeschool their students. I saw it circulating on social media. I am not sure if the good senator over there, ministry, was responsible for it, but I think I heard someone say that Miss was responsible for compiling those links of online resources that parents can use to assist in the homeschooling of their children. And if they did that, kudos to them. They continue to do good work in this country. But parents can access them anyway. They're all over the internet, free of cost. And you don't have to set each other. You can give those links and just give them the guidance. Some oversight and supervision, but you don't have to stand in front of them like a teacher would do for them to learn. In fact, if you give them the opportunity to do their own exploration, you might find that they may enjoy the learning more and may take in more. But the fact of the matter is that you have to be more involved. And then there's also the watching of the documentaries. I personally love to watch documentaries with my daughter and explain things to her as we watch together. That too is a learning experience for children, and basically that's where education is going in the 21st century, where you're using all kind of resources now, visual, audio, what have you, internet resources that you can use now to teach your children. You don't no longer have to just use chalk and talk or pen and paper. These are just some of the things that, and those are just two. I mean, those parents who are creative, who are musically inclined, they can use that opportunity also to engage in those types of activities. All of this is learning. All of this will help. Of course, there are those core subjects, the math, the English, and so on and so forth, that you may need some additional support with. But that too can also be accommodated in the home if the parent is willing to get involved at that level. And what this particular situation has also shown us is that there's not been that level of involvement before. If the level of involvement, of parental involvement, was there all along, this would not be as difficult as it appears to be for some. You would not hear the crying out that you would have heard from some, very few, but you would not have heard that. So they should use this opportunity now to get involved, because at some point schools are going to reopen. And I'm going to speak to that. We may speak a little bit more to the estimates. Schools are going to reopen in this country at some point. I can't tell you when, but at some point there will be traditional schooling in this country again. And this opportunity now, where you get to work with your child for the next couple of weeks or so, should encourage you that when schools open, to be more involved in your child's education. And involved does not mean that you will just look at their reports or ask them how was school. A lot of parents do that. How was school? School was good, of course. Get in trouble? No, if they ask. And that is it. Or they may look at your report, may sign it, may not even look at it, but they may sign it at any term and send it back to thing. That's not parental involvement. Involvement is when you are directly involved, like how you have to be. You have to continue to be directly involved going forward when schools reopen. So that's one piece of encouragement I want to give parents. Use this opportunity to get to know your child. Get to know your child's challenges. Because some of them have challenges that parents are unaware of, and this is the opportunity to get to know them. Because you have to teach them. And if they're not learning like you think they should be, don't get frustrated. Note that, because at some point when things normalize in this country, you have to have that child assessed. You have to have that child looked at and worked with, so that child would not be disadvantaged. So that's something to bear in mind going forward. And I'm wrapping up. I'm coming to end. But as I say, schools will open at some point. So let me just speak to what we intend to do or what will be done going forward. There are still a number of schools that are now closed and will be closed for a little while that are still in a state of disrepair. And the ministry will still be looking forward, just like the country is looking forward to push ahead with some of the tourism projects. We got to look to make schools. You got to bring schools into a state of comfort for those who work there, for both the children and staff. We have to repair those schools that were problematic for the last couple terms, some for the last couple years. And I think this ministry has embarked, or will embark on another ambitious attempt to fix as many schools as we can fix in this country during the summer program, going forward, 2020 summer program. Because we understand the importance between a comfortable working environment and learning and teaching. And let me just use that to segue quickly into disaster preparedness, because even as we fight this virus right now, in two, maybe 3 months, we may be fighting on a second front. This is one front. We'll face a second front, and that is the front climate change, because the hurricane season is going to start. We may still be in this battle, but the hurricane season will start, and that will present its own challenges. So even as we prepare now, and we prepare to teach, we also have to have our schools, our hurricane shelters, and everything ready in the event that we get a double whammy. I don't want it to happen. I can't imagine how it would happen. I would love that the entire Caribbean region be spared of a hurricane event for maybe the next 3 or 4 years, but there's a possibility that we may get one this year. This 2020 may be the year of reckoning. Maybe I'm saying that we may find ourselves in a situation where we may have that. They mean to scare anyone, but there's that reality. So we have to prepare for that in the event. We have to prepare. We know that we normally face hurricanes around hurricane season, so we are in better position than where we are now with this pandemic, which caught a lot of people by surprise. But we know that we have to get our facilities in a working condition, so that in the event that if, God forbid, and there's an event, hurricane event, that we have some place safe for our people. So we are going ahead with our water tank program. I'm sure that they're working on the bathrooms, ensuring that the bathrooms are completed, ensuring that schools have generators. In the event that there's, in many cases, if there are hurricanes, there are power outages, there are water outages, so we must have that potable water, we must have electricity. And we must have our buildings in the ready. So I'm not saying that to scare anyone, just to remind persons that in a few months we still have hurricane season. And then there's also the School Meet Center. I would have spoken about it recently. I had the good fortune to celebrate a church service, 57 years of its existence, 57 years of providing the nation's children with meals, ensuring that students weren't allowed to sit in class hungry. In many cases, not only providing children with lunch, but also providing some of those children and their families with dinner. So there was also that. So I had the opportunity to be with them and that. And we are working towards the completion of the center in 6 Roads, a state-of-the-art center, which, as the Prime Minister alluded to, and I would have mentioned that earlier, would not only serve the children of this country, but in the event of a hurricane event, could be used to serve the people of this country, or assist with the feeding of the people of this country. So there's that. Mr. Deputy President, there are a number of other things that were on the cards for this ministry in terms of what we could do. You know, we still have to push ahead with some of the programs in terms of training our teachers to detect those students with special needs. We still have a number of programs to train our teachers to work with children with challenges and behavioral challenges in schools. Those things still exist. Those things will exist long after this. We have won this battle with COVID. So it's important to know that these things that we have not stopped everything just to deal with this, that there are still things that are ongoing because we anticipate at some point we'll be back to normal. But I will not get into them now. And I'm getting an indication from some of my colleagues that I should wrap up. And I will do that by saying this. this COVID-19 pandemic is a reflection point for all of us in this country. Giving us the opportunity to see how vulnerable we are as a people, how susceptible we are to certain things. It would also tell us how much we care about the most vulnerable people in our society, how much we regard our elderly. Because we know that our elderly are listed among the most vulnerable. And our behaviors will determine if we care enough about our elderly to do what we are instructed to do and make every effort to ensure that we do not contract this virus and go back to our homes and expose our grandparents, our older parents to this virus who are more susceptible. It will tell us a lot about ourselves. And that's something that we need to be very cognizant of. But what it does, though, on the brighter side is that it shows us that we must have a greater integration of our technology into not only our schools, but into the running of our country. And I'm telling you, I must applaud and commend our Prime Minister for being so forward-leaning in her thinking as to go ahead and create a Ministry of Innovative Technology and a MISS. Let me just put that deals almost entirely with technology, that understands that we should be able to use that technology to our benefit to run a government. So when e-governance becomes a feature of the Barbadian political landscape, that puts us in a position now where we can better rally through this situation, because we can still meet through e-governance, we can still function as a country through e-learning, through e-testing. This is what this particular pandemic has shown us. We are better prepared than most because of a forward-thinking government and a forward-thinking political leader. So as I close, I just want to say that just like everybody else in here, I hope that we would weather this particular storm we get through, that persons exercise the care, the caution that they've been warned, and that we all stay safe. We all do all that is in our power to ensure that we fight and wrestle this disease to the ground, and that we come out of this a stronger, a better, and more united Barbados. And with those few words, Mr. Deputy President, I'm obliged.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that this sitting be suspended until 3:45 for lunch.
That we suspend until 3:45. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please. 3:15.
3:15, sorry, sir.
3:15, that was what you thought, right? Yeah. Huh?
Until 5 minutes to 3.
So the question is that we suspend until what, 2:55? Until 2:55. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We are suspended until 2:55.